Hey, what's up? Hello, everybody. Welcome back to Roll Pod, an Alabama sports podcast from Bama 247. I'm your host, Cody Goodwin, here with Mike Rodak today. Alex Scarborough taking a week off. He's taking vacation. I could use a vacation if you could hear the sound of my voice because I'm very nasally and I'm dealing with some sinus issues, but we play hurt on this podcast. So we're gonna keep things rolling. Mike and I are going to discuss a couple of things that Alex actually wrote last week. He got to sit down with Alabama coach Kalen DeBoer to catch up on a few things. So Mike and I are going to do the typical podcasting and react to the things that our buddy wrote. We are also going to discuss the NFL Combine is this week. Not in too much depth because I know that this is a college sports podcast, but 9 Alabama players got invited to the Combine this week. The workouts will be later this week, but the interviews, I believe, are starting as early as today. But first, Mike, as we usually do, we're going to start with our usual basketball minute. Last Saturday, Alabama got back in the win column, a 96-83 win over Kentucky. Believe it's just the 4th time ever that Alabama has swept Kentucky home and away, and the 2nd time that they've been able to do that under Coach Nate Oates. So that's pretty impressive given Kentucky's history. But more importantly, Crimson Tide get back in the win column. They're now 22-5 this season, 11-3 in SEC play. 4 games left. We're recording this on Tuesday. They will play later today against Mississippi State. But you and I were both in the building on Saturday to watch Alabama take down the Wildcats. What were your ultimate takeaways from that performance?
Yeah, I mean, it's not your father's Kentucky team. It's not the Kentucky team of 10 years ago. It's interesting how much the SEC has changed. The thought of sweeping Kentucky in a 2-game, home and home 6-7 years ago for Alabama especially would have been wild. It would have been big news, but it's different these days. Obviously, Auburn is more the team to beat this year. Kentucky's kind of more of a middle of the pack team. They've been banged up. They were without 2 of their top 3 scorers for this game. And you look on the court and you're like, all right, Alabama's clearly the more talented team, which again, historically, you're almost never saying that for a Kentucky team to be out-talented, if you will. Because typically they're just bringing in, under Calipari, it was just, one-and-done freshmen, 5-star kids, like NBA kids, every single year. Totally different approach under Mark Pope. I mean, the recruiting class this past year was not even in the top 10. It took a couple in-state kids, and both of those guys played. Noah and Perry played a decent amount in this game because of the foul trouble they had because of the injuries that they had. It was a little bit of a limited Kentucky team. So, it's not, I don't want to discount Alabama's win. Obviously, they needed it really badly. I think the fall behind at home, 20-9, was obviously a big point of frustration for Nate Oates after he had emphasized so much getting off to a fast start and pulled guys really early from that game and was trying, pulling out all the stops and trying to get things going. And it took a little while for that to happen. And once it did, they were in pretty good shape. There were a couple moments in the second half where, Kentucky made a little bit of a run here and there, but overall they were in control of the game, after the first 10, 12 minutes. So, it's good, obviously, for Alabama to pick up the win. I think if you had lost this game, then you're really in dire straits in terms of trying to lock up that top 4 seed. But you have at least 3 harder games coming up. And I think Mississippi State, Kentucky comparison's probably, it's a toss-up. I mean, Mississippi State's probably a little bit of a stronger, tougher team. Like, I think you're going to have to play a different style of game against them, more defensive-oriented team. And Kentucky, if they're firing on all cylinders, is more of an offensive-oriented team. But, we still have 4 more games. And like we've talked about on previous shows, you are trying to just lock up that top 4 seed because that's not a given right now. And you have, Florida and Auburn ahead of you. I think you really need to win at least one of those. And then you have the Tennessee game, which is a really tough game coming up this weekend. that, you can't overlook either. So tough stretch of basketball coming up for Alabama, but the Kentucky game, I think they did what they needed to do. Turnovers were still a little bit high. They shot the ball better, I feel like, down the stretch. Their 3-point shooting, they made 4 of their final 5, including 3 from Chris Youngblood. So that was pretty big. Once they had a little bit of foul trouble for Grant Nelson and Cliff Amore, and they were just trying to kind of put the game away in the final 8 minutes. For Youngblood to come up with those 3 threes was pretty big. And overall, their 36% 3-point shooting is better than what their season average has been. So that's a pretty good takeaway from a game that was, probably not the most memorable in the world.
96-83 Alabama over Kentucky. You make a good point that Kentucky did not have all of their horses for this one. Jackson Robinson, Lamont Butler, 2 of their top 3 scorers were not available in this game. Otega Owe, who is their leading scorer, 15 points a game, was held to 2 points, and he also fouled out with about 7 minutes left. So not the most ideal game, I suppose, for Kentucky. But I do think that you got to give Alabama a little bit of credit, right, for taking advantage of that, for getting a win on the road. I'll be honest, they go down 20-9, and I think midway through the first half, they're down 30-18. I'm sitting there thinking, because we saw what happened against Auburn, right? They went down 9-0, they lost by 9. We saw what happened when they played Missouri. They went down 12-0, they lost by 12. So I'm sitting here thinking midway through the first half, like, not quite, oh boy, here we go again. But I think the thought that came into my mind was, how are they going to respond to this? They responded much better. 24-2 run led to a 47-40 halftime lead, and then they were basically, they sieged control of the game at that point. Owe was kind of out of sorts. They were still giving up some threes, but this Kentucky offense, even when they're not fully loaded, still a really, really good offense. I mean, the last 3 games they've played, Auburn, Missouri, and Kentucky, those are 3 of the top 10 offenses by Ken Palm's offensive efficiency. So, hey, give Alabama a little bit of credit for being able to respond the way they did, even if it was a little bit undermanned. I did want to ask you about Mark Sears and just the lineup. Mark Sears dropped 30 points in this game. First time in his storied career that he has dropped 30-plus points in back-to-back games. It seems like, and I know that they're 1-1, but it seems like Mark has found a little something, right? 35 against Missouri, 30 against Kentucky on 8 of 17 shooting. Over the last 2 games, he's shooting 54% from the floor and 42% from 3. Part of that has been LeBaron Philon re-entering the starting lineup. I know he's had some turnover issues, but it seems like putting LeBaron at the 1 has allowed Mark to play a little bit more off ball. He can be a little bit more of that creator and scorer that basically the same role that he played last year when leading Alabama to the Final Four. What have you made of putting LeBaron back in the starting lineup to open things up for Mark Sears and just what he's been able to do the last couple of games?
Yeah, what were they waiting for? I mean, I guess you could say Philon's ankle injury was kind of what forced him out of the lineup in the first place. But obviously, Nate was pretty adamant about keeping Jaren Stevenson in the lineup. I thought, or he thought, was a pretty good defensive player. And Jaren had a good game against Texas too. Let's not forget about that. But I guess this whole idea is that you put in multiple guards or multiple ball handling guards like Philon and Sears, and you can kind of let Sears play off the ball and catch and shoot and get open and things like that. And it's worked out the last couple games because Youngblood's a guard, but he's built more like a small forward, kind of plays. He's not really a primary ball handler. If you put multiple ball handlers out there like they had last year, with Estrada and Sears, it seems to work out better. But you're probably giving up something on defense, especially if Sears is not playing up to his defensive capability, which, has been a story at points for him. So, there's obviously a give and take. There's obviously a reason why Nate Oates, I think, waited this long to make that switch. But, it works as long as Sears is hitting his shots. I mean, if he goes, whatever it was, 1 of 9, I forget what his number against Auburn was until the end. It's not going to work quite as well if he's taking a ton of shots and not hitting them, or if he's turning the ball over, or if he's getting his shot blocked, which is another thing that Nate's brought up, where it's just as bad as a turnover. If you go to the rim, get your shot blocked, and the other team runs it back, it doesn't count as a turnover, but that's a turnover. So, if he's hitting his shots, which even Nate was saying, like 3 of 8 from 3 is not great for Mark Sears. It's good. It's not great. but 11-11 at the line, getting to the line, drawing those fouls has been a little bit of a struggle for him this year. So doing that was a good thing for him. And then, assist turnover ratio 4-2 is where he needs that to be compared to some other games that he's had. So, yeah, if he keeps that up, you feel better, about the backcourt. But then you also look at LeBaron Philon, 5 turnovers, to 3 assists and 0 of 2 for 3, which, the 3-point shooting has not really been there for him. But you did get 3 of 5 from Chris Youngblood and got his 14 points and reached double digits. And you know what happens when Chris Youngblood reaches double digits, or so you've informed me.
Chris Youngblood, when he scores 10 plus points, Alabama is 8-0. It seems like Nate has always mentioned the off the court stuff first when it comes to Youngblood, but when he's on the court and he's playing really well, it just seems like Alabama as an offensive machine tends to move at a different, maybe faster, but also at a faster speed, but like more controlled and more efficient, if that makes sense, when he's able to kind of get on the run that he's able to get on. So I know a lot of his points came late when Alabama already had control of the game, but I thought he played pretty well.
But then I think Aiden Holloway is still potentially their best offensive player. I mean, for the minutes that he plays, had 19 points in 23 minutes in this last game, 5 of 12 from 3. 1 turnover he had. I don't say he's better than Sears, but when Holloway plays, he plays. And it's been, I'll say a pleasant surprise, but it's certainly better than what he did last year at Auburn. I think Nate Oates kind of saw the potential in him, and that's come through. He's still coming off the bench, but you asked me like who their best guards are. It's probably Mark Sears and Nate Holloway, but they're not always on the court at the same time.
Last thing I wanted to get to before we moved off our usual Hoops Minute, you kind of alluded to this, Alabama's last 4 games of the regular season. They start tonight, Mississippi State, who stayed in the polls at number 24. They go to Tennessee this Saturday, return home to play Florida next week during the midweek, and then they finish at Auburn, who's the unanimous number 1 team in the country. I'm curious, Mike, obviously 4-0, I think everybody would be pretty ecstatic, but 2-2, 3-1, like where would your, like, what do you want to see from this Alabama team the last 4 weeks going into Nashville?
Last 4 games. Yeah.
Last 4 games.
Right. I'll say it doesn't matter, but they can go 0-4. Not like they did last year, but they were completely falling apart going to the SEC tournament last year. It doesn't really matter at the end of the day if you can kind of regroup and get your stuff together.
Humor me, Mike. Humor me.
The NCAA tournament. If they go 2-2, I think that's fine. If they go 1-3 and turn around and win the SEC tournament, I don't think anybody's going to care that they lost to Tennessee or Auburn or Florida, especially if they beat Tennessee, Auburn, or Florida in the SEC tournament. So I want to say it doesn't matter at all because obviously the games do matter, but at this point you're needing an Auburn loss outside of the Auburn game to have a chance at the SEC regular season title. So if that doesn't happen, then the Auburn game to end the season is just really for in-state pride. Maybe if you've lost the Tennessee game or the Florida game or both, then you're really fighting for seeding at that point. But I don't know. These games are just kind of, they're there. They're good practice. They're good challenge. As Nate kind of said after the game and again last night, like these are their hardest 3 games up until the potential of playing an Elite 8, Final 4, a national championship game. And even then, that might not even be as highly ranked teams. If you have a NC State like last year or something that happens to advance that far. So just take them for what they are. But again, if they go 3-1, 1-3, 2-2, I don't know if there's a huge difference. I don't know if we're talking about it in 3 weeks would be the way I'll put it. But that's been my consistent message about this all along. And it's what college basketball is. Like, it's about March.
One, I appreciate your consistency. So thumbs up on that end. But also, like, looking at the last 4, if Alabama goes 1-3 or 0-4, which is entirely possible, right? Then you're looking at, 1-3 would put them at 12-6 in SEC. 0-4 would put them at 11-7. That could drop them all the way down to like the 7 or 8 line for Nashville, right? Like, I'm pretty sure they're pretty well locked into at least a first round bye, but can they get the double bye?
Yeah, I just did the tiebreaker machine. So if you're saying Mississippi State wins, you're saying Tennessee wins, you're saying Florida wins, you're saying Auburn wins. It's 0-4. you're saying everything else is chalk, that the favorite team wins, that actually would only get Alabama down to the 5 seed.
Really?
Yeah, because they would have the tiebreaker over Mississippi State and A&M based on round robin record, and above Mississippi State based on winning percentage against the 14th best team in the conference, which would be Oklahoma. So you'd be 11-7, but Mississippi State and A&M, and A&M has a really tough schedule coming up too. They also play Auburn, Florida, and Tennessee, as does Ole Miss. So as much as Nate says these last 3 games, physically the last 3 games are probably the toughest in the country for Alabama. I'm sure they are. Those 3 teams are actually being played by 2 other teams over the final 4 games. Ole Miss has them, and A&M has them. So the SEC is tough, no matter where you look, and that could be to Alabama's benefit. But the 5 seed does still mean that you're playing on Thursday. There's a big difference between the 4 seed and the 5 seed in that regard. So even if you lose, let's say you beat Mississippi State and you lose the other 3, you're still in the 5 seed. So then you really need to beat, let's say, Florida at home, and that would move you up to, well, actually, you're still in the 5 seed in that case with this tiebreaker machine. So it's a lot. There's a lot of other variables. I'm just going with chalk everywhere else, but Alabama would need to go 3-1 to get above the 5 seed if everything else is chalk. It's actually a little bit surprising, but that's what it's spitting out right now.
That's the SEC. Alabama plays Mississippi State tonight, Tuesday, February 25th, 8 p.m. tip-off, but on ESPN2. So be sure to tune in. I'll be in the building. I believe it'll be me and Kirk who will be there tonight. So should be a fun matchup if the first matchup in Starkville was any indication. That is our Hoops Minute. We're going to pivot now to football, kind of. Alex isn't here, but like I said at the top of the show, we're going to talk about a couple of things that he wrote last week. He got to sit down with Alabama football coach Kalen DeBoer, and they discussed a number of different things, including what DeBoer wants to see from both the offense and the defense moving forward. He also discussed kind of the quarterback situation. I say kind of. He didn't reveal too many details about the actual 3-way quarterback battle. But another thing that I did want to ask you, Mike, is that Alex, among the many things that he wrote, also wrote a column about how just sitting with DeBoer and listening to him talk, he said that DeBoer says things feel different this offseason. And I can imagine so, because when you consider what last offseason was like, right? A week after he led Washington to the national championship game, boom, he's in Tuscaloosa replacing Nick Saban. It was a whirlwind first month, just trying to do his best to retain the roster. They were I don't know that they got any sort of rest really until they got all the way through spring practices last offseason. But this offseason, DeBoer has hinted that it feels very different. Alex wrote a full column on it. I'm not going to relay detail for detail what Alex wrote, but you and I both read it. I'm curious just kind of your thoughts on DeBoer's comments about this offseason compared to last season, and if that means anything at this juncture in the offseason. I know that spring practices are going to be whatever, and really it probably won't be until fall camp or even week 1 or 2 that we learn something about DeBoer's second team, but just his comments about things feeling different, I thought were interesting, and I was curious what you thought.
It's true for everybody in a second-year coach situation. It's a good thing, obviously, like when you have a second year and you have this continuity and you have everybody knows the system already and you're starting at a different point. I've seen it before, though. I mean, Doug Marrone's second year in Buffalo. Rex Ryan's second year in Buffalo. In fact, I was just pulling up, this was 2016, the story that I wrote for ESPN.com, when Rex Ryan, June of 2016, said he believes the Buffalo Bills have, quote, won the offseason and challenged other teams to match what his team has done this spring. He said he's excited. I challenge any team. And he said, for sure other teams have had great camps too, but I've been really impressed with this group. And I thought we had a good offseason last year, but not like this. It's so much different. We competed so well against each other, even in these type of little things, the challenges we have. I just feel great about it. 5 months later, Rex Ryan was fired by the Buffalo Bills while I was sitting in a chair getting my hair cut in Buffalo. So look, you want to say I'm jaded? I've seen this shit before. Like, I'm not trying to say it's the same thing is true in this case, but every coach entering his second season is going to say the same thing. And it's true. Like a second year, everybody knows what's going on. Everything is a little bit slower. There's less chaos. You're not hiring coaches. Players know the playbook. That is all true. It needs to actually work on the field. I mean, the same thing. My third coach I covered in Buffalo, Sean McDermott. First year was actually a pretty good year for him. 2017, they made the playoffs unexpectedly. Second year, they fell apart with the rookie quarterback and kind of revolving door quarterback. So I'm sure, I don't remember specifically what he said that second off season. I'm sure he was saying a lot of the same things going to 2018. So look, it's true everywhere. It doesn't mean that it's not going to happen in the sense that things are different. Things are going to be better this year. I think that's obviously going to be the message that I think Kalen DeBoer wants to send, because nobody is or should be satisfied with what happened last year. And I think if you're saying things are the same as last year, people are going to be like, well, that's not good. So look, it is what it is. Season is won in February, as much as like coaches like to say, you win the offseason during the offseason program, and this is when you win games. Obviously, you still need to win the games in the fall. He's obviously been sensitive to any sort of discussion about things being too lax last year, whether it was before the Vanderbilt game and were they having enough effort in practice or locked in enough. That was obviously a big point of contention that he kind of pushed back against. Then you had CJ Dupree and Jeremy Bernard a little bit later in the year. I think it was after the Tennessee game, talking about, nothing was tucking in your shirts or players not being late. And I think DeBoer pushed back against that one and said that's always been kind of the rule or something that we focused on. It's just a little bit heightened, I think was the word that he used. And, the same message I think he's trying to send here, where you had Rock Montgomery, the backup offensive lineman, who was talking about the offseason program so far. And, there's no more being late. There's no more wearing jewelry. There's a new sense of discipline and all that. And that's one of the things that Kalen pushed back against in his interview with Alex was there's more accountability. You're seeing the players really hold each other accountable and no one flinch, is what DeBoer said. And then he's continued by saying, when I say accountability, I'm not talking about guys that are doing things wrong or not disciplined. I'm talking about the level of strain that they're holding each other to. So there's obviously a lot of sensitivity in his part to saying that things weren't up to snuff last year. But look, when you're 9-4 and you had the results that you had, especially against Michigan and Oklahoma, and just not the game itself, but the result of the Vanderbilt game, especially, like there's obviously things you can do a lot better, not just execution wise and on the field and X's and O's, but kind of the preparation and mentality and all that. So to kind of summarize it, I feel like he's not wrong. DeBoer's not wrong. And it could very well be a different feel and a different team and all that. But it's also completely what you would expect a coach in his situation, any second-year coach, especially a second-year coach coming off of a disappointing season, if you will. That's what you would expect them to say.
So that leads me to two thoughts. First, has a team ever won the offseason and then followed it up by winning the season? I have a couple of thoughts in my head, so I'm curious. Have you ever seen a team win the offseason then also win the season?
Yeah, I mean, I remember that quote because I think, and it wasn't because of me, but I think people kind of just listening to Rex thought that he was talking about, we signed this many players or we made these moves. And, you go back to like the Eagles dream team of 2013, whatever it was, and they made all these free agency moves and it falls flat. And, there was always this sense that you can't really win through free agency. Like just because you signed the most free agents or spent the most money in free agency, that didn't mean like you were going to win on the field that season. So,
I would argue the Eagles did that this season.
Right. Yeah. And there's some years that it works. So, in terms of what I've seen, I don't know, like, I feel like the 2018 offseason for the Bills, they made two big, and I'm not to get too far down that path, but like they made two big trades in the first round to move up for Josh Allen. That did not win them games that year, in part because he got hurt. He had an elbow injury. But that has turned them into one of the best franchises in the NFL over the long term. So that offseason kind of set them up for future success, not just that year or not in that year, but in future years. So it depends. Like I don't know. We'll see. You never really know. That's the beauty of following all this. You don't really know where it's going to go. But I would say this, like, you lose at Florida State, conceivable. Like, it's a touchdown favorite game. It's going to be a close game, I think, in terms of how people view it. Nobody's going to care what you did in February or that you were more disciplined or whatever. Like, people are going to be down your throat by the start of September, by Labor Day weekend. So
that game's got the potential to be a tone setter for the rest of the season because like you've mentioned multiple times, you lose that game, you fall on your ass week 1 after a lackluster first year. Hot seat's just going to ramp it all the way up. Like, Alabama fans are not going to be happy. However, if you go in there and you win that game, and we don't know what Florida State's going to be, right? Because they tapped the portal one year and went 13-0. They tapped the portal the next year and went 2-10. We just don't know, I guess, what Florida State's probably going to offer. But there's a lot more pressure, I think, on Alabama in that game than Florida State. And you know that they're going to play up the whole Final Four-team playoff. They picked Alabama over Florida State. That is going to get a lot of play, not just the week leading up to the game, but probably the entire month of August. So talking about like adding pressure and building that game up into being more than just a really important week 1 game.
And honestly, that's why I think it's good that Alabama's keeping their spring game. I don't know if they will long term because other schools are getting rid of it, but the ability for Ty Simpson or Keelan Russell or Austin Mack to play in front of not a full stadium, but in tens of thousands of people and try to execute things, that does help when you go into Florida State, as opposed to just going cold and not having a game and then having these closed scrimmages in front of an empty stadium in August. And then all of a sudden, August 30th, whatever it is, you walk into Doak Campbell Stadium and they're doing, like the Chiefs, and that's a different environment than what you've experienced. Not like Alabama fans are going to be doing that on April 12th, but you do get a little bit of a flavor for what a crowd and playing in front of a crowd is like. So that's, I think, a good thing to keep the spring game. Just at least you have one semi, pressure situation for a quarterback to have operated in.
Agreed. To circle back on has a team won the offseason and then proceeded to win this season? Honestly, the first thought that came to mind was Ohio State.
Yeah.
Because we saw how much the addition of Jeremiah Smith as the number 1 overall recruit. Like, I don't know if you saw the video, but I saw the video and I cackled, but then I understood after I watched him play, like, it was signing day and Ryan Day's like addressing the media, and you can tell that he's still like sweating profusely because Jeremiah Smith hadn't signed yet. And then somebody tapped him on the shoulder and said like, yeah, hey, he's officially signed. His fax is in. And then he almost like fake fainted there at the lectern. But like, we saw how important he was, right? And then that was before they were able to add, I think they had already added Will Howard through the portal, but then that was before they were able to add Caleb Downs. And we know how good that guy is, right? So being able to win on the recruiting trail, to win through the transfer portal, and then Ohio State ultimately went and won the national championship this past year. That was honestly the first team that came to mind. I'd have to really rack my brain to see other teams that won, quote unquote, the offseason and then proceeded to win in season as well.
I was just going to say, I would caution people from writing off Florida State in the portal. Just because it didn't work for them last year doesn't mean that it's not going to work for them this year. And they doubled down in terms of they built their team again, kind of through the portal. And maybe it didn't work last year, but they were, in terms of portal rankings this year, that's 2026. Let's go recruit to transfer. They were number 7 in the country. They've added 16 players through the portal, including 7 4-star portal commits, including their starting quarterback, most likely, and Thomas Castellanos. So
that's the guy that quit on BC, right?
Yeah.
I shouldn't say quit, but like when he got replaced, he very much like it was like within a week or a few days after he got replaced as the starting quarterback that he was like, I'm going to the portal. I want to go play somewhere. And so that sounds harsh, but also like it could be interpreted that way. So I'm curious to see what Norvell can do with him.
Yeah, I mean, they brought in Squirrel White from Tennessee. They brought in Jason Jenkins from Tennessee, Luke Pettibone, offensive lineman, who's pretty highly rated, Mike Pettis, another offensive lineman, Deuce Robinson, a wide receiver from USC. So who knows? Maybe those players will work out better than what they had last year. There's an element of unknown with that game, with the new coordinators, with Gus Malzahn. Alabama probably benefited from that last year, when they had an element of unknown about what they were doing. And I think we're able to probably take advantage of Georgia more than you would have expected. And, it's probably still going to be the case with Alabama this year because different quarterback, different coordinator. But the Florida State game is big. And I'm sorry to be talking about it in February, but it's going to sneak up on us because it's, 6 months from next week. So it's an August 30th game, to open the season on the road, which they haven't done in 25 years. It's a big game.
It's a big deal. It's a big deal. But the final thought to just kind of finish this thread with Alex sitting down with DeBoer and him saying that him being DeBoer, saying that things feel different this offseason. And I wanted to kind of circle back and tie that to something that you had actually written when it was announced that Ryan Grubb was going to rejoin as the offensive coordinator. Alex did ask DeBoer about that. So there's a story to that as well. Go click on it in the show notes. But just the idea that things might feel different and DeBoer kind of hinting that there's a little bit more comfortability and that coaches are able to coach rather than explain and really help these guys learn their playbooks and stuff like that, because they, outside of, I think, Hitchler, everybody on the staff is basically back.
Mm-hmm.
I'm curious. It seemed like he was a little hesitant in this first year because he just wanted to, I don't know, keep people happy in some regard. Do we think we're going to and the reason I bring up the whole Ryan Grubb thing is because you wrote a really good column coming out of that decision that said hey, DeBoer's putting his best foot forward now. Are we going to see more decisions like that this offseason, this spring ball through the 2025 season, now that this is kind of more so his team than maybe him coaching Saban's guys, if that makes sense?
Yeah. I still think what he wants to be as a coach is probably still more, I don't say detached, but like the overseer. That's what Courtney Morgan kind of talked about when Alex talked to him last year. He's very good at delegating. I think that's especially in the personnel and the recruiting side. So you could almost make the argument that bringing in Ryan Grubb actually allows DeBoer to do more of that and be more of the CEO because he has such a trusted set of eyes on offense, whereas last season you only had Nick Sheridan and Jamarcus Shepard that you had known coming into that year in terms of your offensive coaches. So there's actually probably more of an incentive or more of an opportunity for him to step back. And you have plenty of coaches in offense, as we talked about. You got enough guys in that quarterback room between Grubb and Sheridan and Mitch Dolan. You brought in Tyler Hughes as a analyst, but it sounds like he's probably going to be working more special teams. But he does have a background with offense. So you can kind of let those guys do what they do and you be the guy that watches over all of it. So I don't know if it will go that direction, but I did, just to go back to Alex's story for a second. It was the last quote about him, DeBoer, saying, if you feel comfortable, you might want to do that in terms of naming a starting quarterback, sooner rather than later. And it says it helps you get some direction going into the summer, which was even sooner than I would have thought. The fact that you could have a starting quarterback named by Alabama by the end of March or early April was pretty interesting. Obviously, if that's the case, you'd be thinking Ty Simpson. If it's not Ty Simpson by the end of the spring, then maybe that opens the door more for Keelan Russell or Austin Mack. I don't think DeBoer shed a ton of light on the quarterback race in terms of which guys are going to get reps.
He really didn't, but I wish Alex was here to give us a little bit more insight into the interview, but take your vacation when you can, man. But they did kind of go in order, right? They talked about Ty, they talked about Austin Mack, they talked about Keelan. And I guess the one big takeaway I took from that story was that you can maybe sense that DeBoer is excited to get back to more of what his offense looked like at Washington, at Fresno, somewhat at Indiana, compared to what it was last year at Alabama with Jalen Milroe. And he had, I think DeBoer even made the comment specifically, Ty, Mack, Keelan, all pass first guys. And they can create a little bit, but they are a lot more of what we've been saying, that traditional drop back passers, which is really what his offense needs. They need a guy who can drop back and make the throws. And I think it remains to be seen if those guys can make all the throws in the way that Michael Penix could. It's probably not fair to compare those three guys who are all largely unproven to a guy that went top 10 overall in the NFL and is going to be a starter for years to come. However, that was maybe the biggest takeaway I took from DeBoer talking about the quarterbacks with Alex, is that he seems genuinely excited to maybe get back to what he wants his offense to look like because of the personnel now in the quarterback room.
not to beat a dead horse, but you had that personnel last year. So,
but then that gets back to the point that I was trying to make earlier, that will DeBoer be more confident making certain decisions because, like it's year 2 now, like he doesn't have to he doesn't owe anybody in that quarterback room anything in maybe a way he felt like he owed Jalen Milroe last year, right?
Right. Possible. Yeah. I mean, it's still a mystery. I mean, I don't think that the interview Alex had shed too much light on that particular topic. It's one of those 10 years down the road, maybe we'll read a book about it, but get Talty on that one. Why Kalen DeBoer never benched Jalen Milroe. But you had Ty Simpson on your roster last year. So it's still the whole idea of like you're unlocking the offense by starting the quarterback who you could have started or played last year. Something doesn't add up to me on that. I think now, is it possible that Keelan Russell unlocks everything? Because now you're adding a player who, let's face it, is probably a better quarterback, better talent long-term overall than what Ty is. That would intrigue me because I think the ceiling there is certainly very, very high. I don't know. You had a quarterback. Go back to the Wisconsin game. Watch Jalen Milroe in that game. The deep ball was not the problem. Throwing to Ryan Williams was not the problem. The Georgia game, throwing to Ryan Williams is not the problem. Like you had a passing offense that just completely disappeared. But I guess it's all just going to show up again and it's all going to work because you're starting your backup quarterback from last year with the same receivers and probably a potentially worse offensive line. I don't know.
There was a point in the season where Milroe, because Alex kind of alluded to this as well, and I think we all saw it. Milroe, there was a level of confidence lost after probably the Tennessee game when he got hit quite a bit, right? And I would argue that maybe even the South Carolina game that started a little bit because they had Kennard and Dylan Stewart coming off the edge, and that was really the first time he had been hit like that all season. And so you could kind of sense that, okay, things were pivoting in a direction that I don't know that the staff was fully prepared for. Like you could tell that just Milroe kind of turned inward a little bit. And so this is something we still need to learn about the current quarterbacks in the room, but like what's their mental makeup like, right? Like if they get hit, are they able to come back and bounce back from that? If they have a stretch where they don't play very well in the middle of the season, are they able to overcome that and continue to keep playing? That's among the many things that's very fascinating about this quarterback battle. That is something that I think is the most fascinating. And we're not going to find that out until probably, I don't know, weeks 3, 4, 5. Like it'll be
the first 4 games are road games at Florida State and Georgia. Like this season is different than anything I've seen out of Alabama in a while in terms of their schedule because you only have one non-power conference game outside of your FCS game in ULM. That's your only sort of runway game. I mean, yeah, the Wisconsin game at home, I think you'd feel pretty good about. But that's still a Big Ten team. So you don't really have those preseason games for the most part. You have a road game instead of a home game against a power conference team or a neutral site game against a power conference team. Those are tough places for Ty Simpson. That's a tough Georgia defense with Kirby Smart to perform. And then that's even before you go to South Carolina, which is probably going to be a night game. Your confidence is going to have to stay high if you're Ty. That rhymed. And, I think the biggest thing for him, just from what I've seen of him, it's very limited, is what does he think he is as a quarterback? That is the question, because sometimes he plays like he's Aaron Rodgers and he loves to roll out. He loves to turn his back to the field. He thinks he can beat edge defenders around the corner. Sometimes that results in him scrambling and running. Sometimes he'll throw and run. I don't know if that's going to be his best course of action as an SEC quarterback, because I just don't know if he's athletically to that level. He's certainly not what Jalen Milroe was athletically. His best attribute could be standing in the pocket, making the reads, RPO stuff, getting the ball out to potentially a very good group of receivers, and not trying to be Aaron Rodgers and make all these plays. But if your offensive line doesn't allow you to do that, if your running game doesn't allow you to do that, it's going to be interesting. So
last thing I wanted to get to on today's show, the NFL Combine is going to kick off this week. 9 Alabama players got an invite. Jalen Milroe, Tyler Booker, CJ Dupree, Robbie Oots, Tim Smith, Q Robinson, Jahad Campbell, Malachi Moore, and James Burnip. Their workouts are going to be later in the week through the weekend if you're interested in watching, but the interviews, I believe, start as early as today, at least with teams. I think media interviews, some might also start today, but we'll definitely kick off in earnest tomorrow and Thursday. I'm curious, Mike, this is not an NFL podcast, but I think a lot of us are kind of interested to see where these guys go, especially you and me, people that watch the NFL pretty regularly. Who do you think could help themselves the most this week at the NFL Combine of the 9 Alabama guys that are there?
So I think the obvious answer people might gravitate towards is Milroe because, he's going to run a fast 40 and people are going to love that. And that's probably true, but I think people are also expecting that. So I don't know if it's going to surprise anybody if Jalen Milroe runs a 4.4. I think people are going to be looking, when I say people, I mean NFL teams, looking more at how does he do pro days or pro day for Alabama, but also their facility visits. How does he do on the board, as they call it? You're in the meeting room. So that's probably where Milroe has the most to gain, is actually when he makes these facility visits. I think Booker is going to impress a lot of people in interviews, but how much room does he have to gain? I don't know. He's already, right now, I think Mel Kiper had him like 13th in the draft. So you don't get much higher than that as a guard. So he's kind of already where he is. I think Jihad Campbell's kind of already where he is. I think the two guys that honestly the combine might help are Q Robinson and Malachi Moore, because they're both coming off of injuries. And the combine, it's not the sexiest part of it. And I don't say that because guys are running around in tights, but I just say it because it's a medical checkup. It's a lot of it is behind the scenes medical evaluations of players.
Wearing tights.
They could be wearing less. I don't know. Look, the combine is a strange event, and I have covered.
That's putting it lightly.
I've covered it several times. It's the underwear Olympics, as Mike Florio always called it for Pro Football Talk, and at least some of this stuff is not as visible. The whole Tom Brady video of him stripping down, and it's like the meat market where they take pictures of you and look at your body type and all that. Like, that's what the combine kind of is. It's a little bit weird. But again, behind the scenes, there's a lot of value for teams in getting a set of neutral eyes on injured players. And then there's usually a medical recheck, I think early April, late March, where players will go back to Indianapolis and they'll get another set of MRIs or whatever it is. So again, for the two injured Alabama players, Q Robinson, Malachi Moore, I think that means a lot. And interesting to see where those guys will go too, because there was a time a couple years ago where Malachi Moore, I remember, was popping up on mock drafts as a first round pick. That's obviously not going to be true this year for him. I don't think he'll be a second round pick either, but he has enough kind of there as a player that could he be kind of a late day 2, early day 3 pick? I think certainly. But they're going to have to feel good about him, with the physical injury thing. And then, so what does he bring? He's not Brian Branch, and that's kind of the guy who he came in with and competed with his first couple yews. And, Branch is, I think, a better player athletically in terms of what he's able to do. But I think Malachi can still do some things. And I don't know, really interested to see where he goes in this draft. And Q Robinson, too, is a guy that really popped, as an edge rusher when he played. And, he's going to get drafted. It's just where 4th, 5th, 6th round. Like, I don't know. So I think those two guys to me are kind of the most intriguing.
I agree. I'm also curious to see just some of the testing stuff from Jihad Campbell. We know he's a freak athlete because he did a little bit of everything on the field. He came in as an edge defender and basically became a middle linebacker. So what are the pro eyes going to think of that? How was whatever team that drafts him, how are they going to view kind of his skill set? Like, I know he's drawn comparisons as like a Micah Parsons light because he can do a little bit in the middle, but also just a devastating edge rusher. So how is he going to test? Like, what's his broad jump going to be like? What's his high jump going to be like? He's got really long condor-like arms. So like, what does that mean for his bench press? So I'm really curious to see kind of how he tests, what the reception of him is coming out, because he's pretty sure he's locked into, at worst, being like a top 40 overall pick, but he seems to be locked into the first round pretty well. How high can he go with a really strong combine? I'll be curious to kind of see that. So, and then, I think Malachi Moore is also kind of interesting because he's late day 2, early day 3 seems to make the most sense for him. And also, like, He's played safety. I thought he played it fairly well, not at an elite level this past season, but it was also the first time he got to really truly play safety and really pivot to that position. So he's got that experience. And then we also know that he's a pretty good coverage guy, especially in the slot. I know when him and Branch were on the same team, Branch kind of overtook him for that starting star spot, but Malachi's still really, really good in coverage. So is he a guy that some NFL teams like, yeah, we can bring him in because he's just a versatile DB, and we're just going to find a way to either get him on the field or just find a role for him so that he can go play. I don't know, that type of versatility that he brings to the table, I think will be really interesting. So long as he passes all his medical stuff, I think there's going to be a lot of teams that are really going to enjoy him. They're going to enjoy the interviews with him. And then he's a pretty smart X's and O's guy too, just coming up through Saban's DB room. So I think he'll probably ace it on the whiteboard as well. So those are probably the two guys that maybe pique my interest the most. I'm also, I don't know, maybe it's just because I'm from the Midwest. I came from Iowa and I really like my tight ends, but I'm kind of excited to see how CJ Dupree and Robbie Oots help themselves this week as well. If they do it all, they both seem like day 3 type guys, but who knows? Maybe some GM will be smitten after getting to talk to them this week in Indy. Those were generally my thoughts. I don't know. You got any? I know the combine is more like background noise, like it's just something you kind of have on the TV while you're busy doing something else this week. But Mike, your NFL experience, like is it one of those things that you just kind of keep on? Do you sit down and watch like the 40 when a super fast guy is on deck? Like how did you approach covering the combine?
When I was there, I've covered it in person, I don't know, 5 times maybe. And it used to be a much smaller deal when I first started 15 years ago. I mean, the media room was a lot smaller. There's a lot less people there. And it's kind of grown. And I think they've actually let reporters in to watch some of these drills, because at first they didn't. There was like a PFWA pool reporter or something. It was one person who could watch it, report on what happened, and then otherwise you're watching it on TV. But
now everybody sees everything.
Right. I mean, there's not especially when you're covering for the NFL, it's not like you're covering specific players from your school like you are at Alabama. Like you're covering everybody. So you're just trying to guess like who might be interesting to talk about, local kids or whatever there might be. So it's a lot of kind of dart throwing, and quite frankly, for most people, going to Indianapolis is more about drinking and the nightlife in terms of schmoozing and boozing and all the stuff that happens. I remember running into a Patriots or I don't know what team is that, the Texans. He's a former Patriots player. He's coaching for the Texans at one of those years, and just smoking a cigarette outside of the hotel, running into him and talking to him. And it's kind of stuff like that. It's just so bizarre.
It sounds not unlike the Senior Bowl, like where NFL media kind of descend on college football's footprint a little bit, and they just kind of do their own thing in mobiles. It sounds like it's the same thing in Indy.
It's the Senior Bowl on steroids. I mean, it's a much bigger group of people there, but at the same time, like there's NFL coaches now that are skipping it. They don't feel like there's a ton of value in it.
Players are skipping it too.
Be interesting to see where it goes, literally and figuratively, because the NFL might want to move it out of Indianapolis. That's kind of been a story as well. I mean, a lot of people think Indianapolis is the perfect place. It's a very centrally located city. There's all these walkways in between all the hotels and the convention center and all that. But the NFL likes money, and if they can sell more things by moving it to LA or Miami, then they will do that. And I think people will be upset with that.
That'll be the combine starts in earnest and really takes off this week in Indianapolis. Is it NFL Network? I'm assuming it's NFL Network. That's basically going to carry full coverage. So if you want it on as background noise, that's the channel you need. If the Alabama players say anything interesting, we'll be watching from afar to see if there's anything interesting that comes out of that. And if any of those guys help themselves, we'll probably circle back on that next week, or maybe even write some stuff on Bama 247. But that's really all we had for today, guys. We'll be back later this week to discuss probably some more pre-spring football stuff. I'm going to come up with a game for Mike and I to play as kind of the last pre-spring podcast before it officially spring practices start next week. So March 3rd, that's next Monday. We navigated the offseason, quote unquote, successfully.
We won the offseason.
We won the offseason. There's the title of the podcast right there. We won the offseason, and we're going to win the in-season too. We're special like that. So we'll be back later this week for one more pre-spring podcast. In the meantime, though, be sure to rate and review this show wherever you listen to your podcast, Apple, Stitcher, Spotify, even our Bama 247 YouTube page. Subscribe to Bama 247 and 24/7 Sports to get all of our great coverage on the Crimson Tide. We are finishing out spring positional previews this week. I'm going to watch another episode of that Fox Nation documentary on the 2024 season, and we'll have another review and recap of that. Basketball plays both tonight and on Saturday in Knoxville. We'll have coverage of that. And then also baseball and softball. I know they're kind of taken off kind of in the background of all this other football and basketball talk going on, but baseball especially, hot start for the Crimson Tide baseball team as well. So you can get all of that coverage at Bama 247. As always, we appreciate you guys for listening. We will talk to you all again soon.